morning and welcome to another holiday edition of Teachers Talk Radio, the breakfast show. Now, if you know anything about me, you will know that I am fascinated with retrieval practice. So today I'm talking to retrieval practice expert, Dr. Pooja K. Agarwal.
Live from Abu Dhabi, this is The Breakfast Show with Kate Jones on Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live on the Podbean app or desktop player. Just head over to www.podbean.com/LSW/TT Radio or search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TT Radio.
Good morning, everyone. So I can safely assume that all teachers are currently on their summer holidays. I hope you are relaxed. I hope you're enjoying whatever it is that you are doing. So if you're listening live, please do tell me if you're in the Podbean studio, where you're listening from. I always like to know where our listeners are from around the world. Fantastic. Tom Rogers, our main man of Teachers Talk Radio founder, is here listening live from Liverpool. Hi, Tom. Okay, then. So before I get on to the show today, just a quick recap. I always do this. What did we do last week? Last week, I had a fantastic interview with Ross Morrison McGill, also known as Teacher Toolkit. He's authored 6 books. He delivers lots of CPD. He's spoken around the world, former teacher, deputy head teacher, and it was a great chat. I've had lots of people catching up this week, listening back, because you can listen back to all Teachers Talk Radio shows. We are live, but we also share them as a podcast. So if you missed my chat with Ross last week, please do check it out. We talked about so much. It was really interesting, from his career to social media, workload, well-being, Ofsted. I find it really interesting talking to people about Ofsted. I've never experienced an Ofsted inspection, as I've taught in Wales and the United Arab Emirates. And I've spoke to lots of people who work in schools. Ross Morrison McGill had his views. We've had the former head of research, Professor Daniel Mears. He was head of research at Ofsted. He was a fantastic guest. I've spoke to Dame Alison Peacock. So it's always really interesting because it's very clear Ofsted have changed their direction in recent years with the 2019 guidance report about what they were looking for. But obviously, there is quite a lot of tension between the teaching profession and Ofsted. Anyway, I won't go into that too much, but I am always keen to hear people's views and experiences. I may even teach in England myself as I'm returning to the UK later this year, so that might be something that I experience. Also, last week, we spoke about Couch to 5K, hashtag Couch to 5K teachers. I haven't been running this week. I haven't been well, and it's really sort of messed up my routine. I was doing so well in terms of running. But, you know, I was sensible. As much as I wanted to run, I just didn't have the energy to do so. But hopefully you're still going with your Couch to 5K. If you are, do tweet out hashtag Couch to 5K teachers, or let me know how you're getting on, if you're enjoying it or struggling, or just have any tips and advice. That would be greatly appreciated. And then also something else I've noticed from social media, whether that's Twitter or my friends on Facebook, is there's lots of wedding anniversaries in the summer holidays. What do teachers get up to in the holidays? Lots of teachers seem to be getting married, or perhaps they haven't been getting married as many weddings in the last 18 months because of COVID and the disruption. I know I've got friends who had to postpone their wedding plans, change their plans and so on. But it is lovely to see lots of teachers celebrating their wedding anniversaries. So if you've got a wedding anniversary this summer, if you've got married in the summer holidays, then feel free to let us know and we'll give you a shout out. So moving on to my guest today. My guest today is Dr. and Professor Pooja K. Agarwal. Now, Pooja is very well known for her work with retrieval practice, and I've referenced her in my books, in my blogs, and I absolutely love her website, retrievalpractice.org. So Pooja has created this website. She's regularly adding fantastic content. And the reason I say it's fantastic is because it's all freely accessible to teachers. And I will share the links to these on social media. There's some fantastic guides that Pooja and I will discuss, from retrieval practice to metacognition to the latest guide about meta-analyses, which is really interesting. I was reading this morning. Pooja has also co-authored a book with someone else who I'm a very big fan of, that is Patrice Bain, a teacher in America. And Pooja Agarwal is also a teacher and a cognitive scientist. So she does have this really good grasp of retrieval practice in the classroom. And a recent literature review, should we say, like a meta-analysis of research about retrieval practice has just been published. And this is by Pooja K. Agarwal and also her colleagues Ludmila Nunes and Janelle Blunt. This also links into something that I'm going to ask Pooja about, because I asked Pooja about female cognitive scientists. And there's lots of fantastic female role models. So basically, this review article is titled "Retrieval Practice Consistently Benefits Student Learning, a systematic review of applied research in schools and classrooms." And I think this is very timely, because the latest EEF report into cognitive science naturally raised some questions about applied research about cognitive science in classroom contexts and environments. And the reason that there isn't as much research carried out in the classroom, although that's incredibly important, is just because how messy and how complex and how difficult it can be in comparison to carrying out an experiment in a lab. And that is not me arguing that research should be done in labs. That's just the rationale behind it. When we're in a classroom environment, there are a huge amount of variables. And we know this, even within one school, there will be lots of differences in terms of when students are taught, whether it's lesson 1 or lesson 6 at the end of the day, perhaps even numbers in a class, the teachers themselves, their previous knowledge related to content that is being taught. So lots and lots of variables to consider. But this is great because Pooja and her colleagues have screened nearly 2,000 abstracts, 50 experiments that were classroom-based, and we will discuss this and retrieval practice in more detail, but even just from the title, retrieval practice consistently benefits student learning. And what I found interesting about the EEF report were a few things. Actually, it was a very interesting read. If you haven't read it, you can download it for free from the Education Endowment Foundation website. Is that the report stressed the importance of nuance, but essentially it could be argued that the report lacked nuance because it categorized cognitive science together, whereas this review is purely focused on retrieval practice. And I would like to see further reviews that purely focused on cognitive load theory, on dual coding. And that EEF report, perhaps unintentionally, there were statements made about one strategy that were then confused with other strategies. And they all sort of got lumped together. It got mutated by some people. There was some confusing and I think perhaps misleading headlines. And I think it goes to show that when it comes to engaging with research, we do need to be very, very careful. And I'm often very reluctant. Well, I am reluctant. I won't talk about research unless I've read it myself and I'm very confident and familiar with it. I remember being asked on a podcast about a recent review and journal that had been published, and I hadn't had the chance to read it, so naturally I couldn't comment on it. And I think what happens is sometimes people might read the abstract, some people might take away the headlines and then reach a judgment. Whereas there's some really fantastic people who are very good at translating that research to make it accessible and understanding. And one of those people is actually Dr. Pooja K. Agarwal. So if you do have any questions about retrieval practice, please do put them in the chat box. Granted, I might be able to answer them. I can pass them on to Pooja. Pooja is very active on social media. So, as I've said, you can visit her website, but she is also on Twitter at Pooja Agarwal. And there'll be lots of tweets today. There's also the page Retrieve Learn, and that is also on Facebook and Instagram. So, there's lots and lots of material to check out. So, I'm really excited for this interview today. I think we've probably got the two biggest retrieval practice fans, myself and Pooja K. Agarwal, coming together to talk about retrieval practice for an hour. That sounds absolutely fantastic. Well, to me, it does.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News with Megan Goods.
This is your latest Teachers Talk Radio News. A new report from the Institute for Government titled Schools and Coronavirus has been published this week ahead of the exam results days later this month. It calls the period following the March 2020 closure of physical schools easily the most disruptive period in children's education since at least the start of the Second World War. The report also criticises the Department for Education's response to the second year of the pandemic, saying the most unforgivable aspect of what happened is not just the failure to make contingency plans after the summer of 2020, but the refusal to do so. Lessons were not learnt from the first lockdown, with the result that for both school closures and exams, the story from July 2020 to January 2021 was a case of pause, rewind, repeat. The Department for Education has issued a response stating, contrary to the claims in this report, contingency plans for restrictions on schools opening in the 21-22 academic year were first published in August 2020, and contingency plans for qualifications in 2021 were first discussed with Ofqual in October 2020. A new survey carried out by Lucid Talk in Northern Ireland has found that 71% of participants would support integrated schools. This is an increase of 5% since the survey was last taken in 2013. The idea of integrated schooling is to create a religious balance of pupils, teachers, and governors, and acknowledge and respect the cultural diversity they represent. New integrated schools must be set up by parents, or parents have to vote democratically to change the status of an existing school. There are currently 68 formally integrated schools and colleges, which represents 7.5% of all schools in Northern Ireland. A PE teacher in Gloucestershire has been banned from teaching after forging sports qualification certificates for pupils. The students had undertaken all the required work for a sports leadership qualification, but this was never submitted and they were never even registered for the course. Instead, their teacher had forged signatures on their final certificates in a fraudulent attempt to cover up their missteps. The PE teacher from Tewkesbury has also been barred from applying for restoration of their eligibility to teach due to the severity of the incident. That was your latest Teachers Talk Radio News.
Creative Resources, made for teachers by teachers. At Creative Resources, we've been rethinking what a classroom can be. We've created a huge range of more than 2,500 original and exciting resources that span across more than 15 different subject areas. Whether you're looking for primary or secondary level resources, careers options, PSHE, arts or humanities, Creative Resources have the resources for you. We offer full curriculum packages and unique, challenging escape rooms themed on topics such as Shakespeare, Tudors, and fractions. We have quizzes, task cards, Tarsier puzzles, and lots more. Better still, more than 100 resources can be accessed for free. Just visit our website, www.CRE8TIVEresources.com. You can get 10% off any order you make on our website by using the discount code TTRadio. Creative Resources, made for teachers by teachers. Every teacher loves stationery, right? Imagine getting a selection of fun, beautiful and unique stationery items designed and selected especially for teachers, delivered through your door every month. You need to check out teacherslovestationery.club.
I'm always so excited when the box arrives. It's such a treat.
My Teachers Love Stationery Club box is just a little treat to myself every month.
It's always full of delightful and surprising items, including some really good quality stationery brands like Faber-Castell and Stabilo.
And because you never know what you're going to get, it makes it even more fun and special when you get it.
It feels really great to be supporting a family business that's run by real teachers. I can't help feeling like they just know what I'm going to enjoy using stationery-wise better than I do myself.
Visit teacherslovestationery.club and enter the code TTRadio when you buy your first stationery box to save £2 today. teacherslovestationery.club. Introducing the Leadership Masterclass series by Diana Osagi. Learn how to ditch your fears and develop your leadership competence. How to deal with difficult colleagues. How to thrive when you lead in a challenging environment. And how to get colleagues to buy into your vision. Join Diana for her online leadership masterclasses starting on the 10th of July and running all the way through the summer. These sessions are the perfect way to prepare and refresh for the next academic year and beyond. Book your place at courageousleadership.co.uk/events now. The first 50 leaders to sign up get an additional free mini coaching session with Diana herself. Don't miss this. Courageous Leadership Masterclasses at courageousleadership.co.uk/events.
Okay, well, welcome to Teachers Talk Radio, Professor Pooja K. Agarwal. I am so excited to talk to you because I've been a fan for so long. We've been in touch for a few years now, haven't we?
Yes, thank you for having me. I'm so excited. And we've been in touch over Twitter and then email. And I don't remember how we first got in touch. Maybe it was Twitter. And then, of course, have emailed each other and helped each other out. And you always said some very kind things about my book. And I've really enjoyed reading your book. So it's so much fun to finally get to meet you and talk with you.
I know, I've got your book here, and the fact that you and Patrice signed it as well. This book is so special to me. So when people in Abu Dhabi ask to read it, I say, you must look after it and give it me back.
Yeah, powerful teaching. Yep.
Powerful teaching has travelled a long way. It's travelled to the UK, to Abu Dhabi, and from Boston. So we'll start off because you're very well known for your work with retrieval practice and for being a cognitive scientist. But actually, well, I was researching you and I read your CV and it's incredible. So for our listeners, could you just start off and give us a little bit of background about your career, how you've got to where you are now?
Thanks for asking. I will mention that I first started my career as a teacher. I was teaching grades 4 and 5 in St. Louis, Missouri, so in the middle of the United States. And in university and college, I was taking all of my teaching classes, the methods classes, and I still remember my social studies methods and my science methods and how to teach children how to read. And so I'm doing all this coursework. And And I really enjoyed it. But the whole time I kept wondering, like, who says that this stuff works? You know, or like, why am I being taught these methods when it's clear that it was just sort of the way that my professor had taught grade 4 and 5? Like, where are the textbooks? I don't have textbooks in my teacher training program, right? There's no like one main source of information. So how do I really trust that these strategies work in the classroom? And I'm a bit intimidated to be a teacher for the first time. So I want to make sure that what I'm doing works. And at the same time that I was taking my teacher education classes, I started taking psychology and neuroscience classes at my university. And so I know that I can still picture it on one side of my university campus were my education classes, and literally on the other side of campus were my science and neuroscience and psychology classes. And in those psychology classes, I realized there is this whole field of how people learn. There is a science to how people learn, about how we remember things and why we forget things, and why for most people some things are easier to remember than other things. So for example, for most all people, remembering the beginning and ends of movies are much easier than remembering the stuff in the middle, right? You can maybe, if you think back to the movie you watched most recently,
Yeah.
maybe you can think of how it started, but
Yeah.
then the scenes in the middle are kind of murky, and muddy, and then you can think of the last scene in the movie.
Yeah, I'm thinking of Black Widow. Yeah,
Oh,
that's
okay.
exactly
Yeah.
it.
I haven't seen it yet. I'm excited to see it. Yep. And so we have about how we learn and remember, and there's a whole science about it. And then I was taking these classes all about learning, about how to teach to improve student learning, but there just didn't seem to be much evidence behind those teaching methods. And so for me, starting in university now 20 years ago, I had one of those light bulb moments where I want to combine teaching and learning in the classroom with the science of teaching and learning. And so career-wise, then I did start teaching grades 4 and 5. I started conducting research. My first advisor was Henry Roediger, one of the authors of Make It Stick.
That's
so
amazing.
I started doing research with him. Mhm.
Yeah, that's incredible.
Yeah.
Make it.
And then from there, got my PhD in cognitive science, continued to do research, started doing research with Patrice Bain, the
Yeah.
co-author of my book, Powerful Teaching, and have continued to do research, work with teachers, and now I am a teacher as well. I'm a professor of college students. So I teach every day. I have 100 students and I get to teach psychology and neuroscience. So it is all in a very fun way. That light bulb has expanded and come full circle for me between research, teaching, and then collaborating with teachers.
Yeah, absolutely, spreading the word and the message about retrieval practice, because your website, retrievalpractice.org, that is so good, so good. I'm always sharing it with people, and I cannot believe that these guides are there to download freely, easily. And I think that's what you've been really great at, is knocking down these barriers and making it easier for teachers to access and understand this research, because I'm not a cognitive scientist, but I feel like I have a really good grasp of that. And you mentioned some names there that I want to just sort of dig a little bit deeper into. Yeah, so first of all, Professor Henry Roediger. I heard he's called Roddy by his friends. How is that working with him? Because he's just the book Make It Stick was probably one of the first books bringing cognitive science to education. Well, I think the first one that I'm aware of. So are you still in touch with him? Have you collaborated with him? Talk to us about Henry Roediger.
Yes, so Roddy, as many of us call him, or Professor Roediger, and I have worked together again for about 15 years, and he is a professor at Washington University in St. Louis. So that's where I went to university and I got my master's and my PhD. And I had a postdoc with him. So I was at Washington University for 13 years.
Wow.
And a lot of that was because Professor Roediger is just amazing to work with.
Yeah.
So all of us have probably had jobs or careers or positions where you just find the right person that is
Yeah.
so wonderful to work with. And Roddy for me was one of those people. And so I had a really hard time leaving the work I was doing at Washington University. And so he was just very supportive in terms of the research we were doing and insightful and provided his expertise. And he was very supportive in my love of science communication, like you had said. So with him, and also with Mark McDaniel, one of the other authors of Make It Stick, and Kathleen McDermott, the three had received grant funding from the United States Department of Education. And that grant funding included doing research with Patrice Bain, my co-author, and then also creating the guides that you mentioned on my website, retrievalpractice.org. So Roddy was very supportive from the beginning of, let's do this research, let's make sure it's with teachers in the classroom like Patrice, and let's really work on thinking about how do we take all of that research on retrieval practice and turn it into a 10-page guide for teachers. And so over those years, it was just such a phenomenal opportunity to collaborate with Roddy on all of those different pieces again, on the science, the teaching, and the communication.
Oh, that's amazing. And actually, in the UK, I emailed you recently. There was a report by the EEF doing research into classrooms, and I spoke about it on a previous show. And I did say, well, actually, this isn't the first time this is happening. And I mentioned you and Patrice because that was the first thing that came to mind, was about your collaboration as a cognitive scientist and at Patrice Bain as a classroom teacher. So whilst in the UK there was lots of discussion about how research has been lab-based, like the Bjorks, who we've mentioned, they've been on my show. The Bjorks, when they were on my show, said yes, they do a lot of their research in the lab. But I was very keen to stress the point, that there has been research with retrieval practice that has taken place in classrooms. And that's why I love you and Patrice together as a combination, as the cognitive scientist. And she refers to herself as the veteran teacher. And I said, is that okay to say? And she said, no, in America, that's fine. Because I thought it was an insult, veteran. She said, no, it just means very experienced. So what did you do with Patrice Bain? Were you actually then in her class observing? How did that work?
Starting in 2006 is when Patrice and I met. And so it'll actually be the 15th anniversary of when Patrice and I met. I have it on my Google Calendar. It's maybe like 2 weeks from now.
Oh.
Will be the 15th anniversary of the very first day that Patrice and I met. I remember walking into her school and meeting her there right in the lobby. And starting from that meeting, no one had done research on retrieval practice in classrooms. Yeah. For the most part. In 2006, no one had done that. And so starting in 2006, I was during the time I was a PhD student, but I spent 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, sitting in Patrice's classroom and just learning about and watching, does she use retrieval practice? How does she do it? How often does she do it? And then I had a lot of fun brainstorming. Well, how are we going to do research in our classroom? No one had done this before. I knew how to do retrieval practice in the laboratory. We have college students come in and sit in front of a computer and memorize words or something like that. But how do I take what Patrice is already doing, which is a lot of retrieval practice, and how do we collaborate on starting to do some research together? So I spent a full semester observing her classroom. Again, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. And then starting a few months later was when we had created this system of retrieval practice research where her students were using clicker systems. I don't know if you use these in Europe or the UK. Yeah. So every student, this was again 15 years ago, before Kahoot and Quizlet and all of those. 15 years ago, every student had a little remote and they would click in their answer. And what Patrice and I created was, let's say she was teaching a unit or a lesson on ancient Egypt, you know, King Tut and the Nile and Cleopatra. And for some of that information, like if you picture a textbook chapter, half of the chapter students would see on these clicker quizzes, and half of the chapter they wouldn't see on the clicker quizzes, but Patrice would still teach the material. So students were still getting their normal lessons. It's just sometimes the information was on quizzes and sometimes it wasn't. So importantly, all students were participating in retrieval practice. It wasn't like we had some students getting the benefit of retrieval and some students weren't doing it. All students were doing retrieval practice, which we felt was really important to that type of research in the classroom. So from there, we found significant benefits of retrieval practice. I still remember where I was sitting and opening up the spreadsheet and doing some statistical tests. And then that kind of evolved into, well, how many clicker quizzes? And should it be multiple choice or short answer? And when should we give feedback? And then that morphed into, let's add on 6th grade English and 7th grade Spanish and 8th grade biology. So by the end of maybe 5 years of research in Patrice's school, we had grown from just her classroom to grades 6, 7, and 8. And then also the high school level, grades 9, 10, 11, and 12, 5 different subject areas. So it really became this big project over time.
That's incredible. And it's really interesting about how long ago it was. Not a huge amount of time ago, but still, it takes, these things do take a while to get to the mainstream classroom, especially we were talking about this with the Bjorks, and they've been doing this research for decades. So is that after you've done the research and then somewhere later down the line, you thought, let's write a book about this then? So then that's what you decided to do, because it's a few years after the research then that you've obviously stayed in touch and you thought, let's write a book together.
Yeah. Yes. I was actually, again, Patrice and I have known each other, right, for 15 years. I was just looking at photos from 10 years ago when I defended my dissertation. And Patrice is in those photos. She was right there with me when I defended my dissertation thesis. And she and I have celebrated holidays together over the years. She visited me in Boston. I visited her in St. Louis. And just one day, I was talking with a colleague who suggested that maybe now is the right time for me to read a book. I'm in Boston. Things have kind of, settled in a good way with my college students. So this colleague had said, well, why don't you write a book? So I was thinking about, well, I'd love to write a book about this research. And again, I've always been interested in sharing this research with teachers. And it was just sort of a no-brainer. It was just obvious that I had to write this book with Patrice. Of all people, she is, a colleague and a friend and an amazing teacher who's familiar with all this research. So I can't write a book without her. It has to be with her. And so we started talking about the book maybe in 2017. We started writing it in 2018, and it came out in 2019. I know it came out in 2019, but I can't remember if we started talking about it in 2016, 2017. And collaborating with her was so much fun. We were, I was in Boston, the United States. She was in St. Louis, where I had done my PhD. And we wrote the whole book over Google Docs. And we did it all over Zoom. And it worked so well because she and I had already been working together for more than 10 years. So it was just such a pleasure to write Powerful Teaching with her. Absolutely. And she has, I'm sure you've seen, she has kind of a guide, a parent's guide
Yeah.
to powerful teaching, and that's phenomenal. So I was able to help contribute some feedback for that parent's guide that she has as well.
Yeah, that's really important, like spreading the message with teachers and then students and parents. But I've spoken to lots of people about your book, and obviously Ross Morrison McGill, Teacher Toolkit's a fan, Doug Lamar is a fan. It's a very, very popular book. And for the people who haven't read it, when they've asked me, because you're so associated with retrieval practice, they assumed it was retrieval practice, which it is, but it's a lot more, because you write about interleaving, space practice, feedback, metacognition, but how they're all connected as well. So, and I didn't write, when I wrote my book about retrieval practice, I didn't write about feedback, and that was a sort of regret that I had, and I wasn't quite sure. So I'm so pleased that you did, because that was an area where I just was thinking I need to learn more about, because I was following feedback policies in schools, and that's a really important part of retrieval practice, isn't it? The feedback side of that. Teachers often ask about that. Should we give feedback, or should we just skip it, or just look at scores? But what would you say to teachers in terms of the feedback with retrieval practice?
The feedback, as you said, Kate, is so important. And two things I like to point out. One is that as great teachers, we already give our students feedback.
Yeah.
That's just part of what we do as teachers. It's not new. Just like retrieval practice, bringing information to mind is not new. We do that. We give students feedback. It's important to give students feedback to not only fix mistakes, which is the way we usually think of feedback, but also to solidify correct knowledge. So there's a lot of research that, of course, if a student doesn't remember what a neuron is, or they can't draw a diagram correctly, that feedback will help them draw it correctly or identify the parts of the diagram. What feedback also does is when a student retrieves something correctly, again, it helps solidify that. It gives them more confidence that their learning is correct. It's almost like how for teachers, we get formative feedback. For us, it tells us how we're doing. Retrieval plus feedback tells students how they're doing. So an important finding from the research literature that we found in our research in schools, that my colleagues have found in laboratories, is that retrieval practice, giving students clicker quizzes or other types of tech apps, or just simply giving them an entry exit ticket. We talk about brain dumps, writing down everything pulling that information out improves students' learning, sometimes by a grade level or even 2 grade levels. We showed retrieval practice can improve students' grades from a C to an A level. What we know from some classroom research and a lot of lab research is when you give students feedback, it improves their learning even more. So you get this benefit from retrieval, but then feedback is kind of this added boost that improves students' long-term learning. And as you mentioned, another component of feedback is what we call metacognition. So students thinking about their own thinking or thinking about their own learning. So often we ask students, what year did King Tut become a pharaoh? And we think about that answer as either correct or incorrect. And that's it. Students need opportunities for metacognition, to think about how sure am I in my answer? How confident am I? Am I just guessing? Do I really know that answer? And so feedback comes into play. What we call in Powerful Teaching feedback-driven metacognition is that students need feedback so that they can evaluate, oh, I really knew that answer and I got it correct. Or I was just guessing and I got it wrong, so that's something I need to think more about. So that feedback component, as you said, is so critical to retrieval practice and boosting student learning even more.
Yeah, and I think that was a mistake that I made previously of rushing retrieval practice and saying, check your scores, and not giving enough time for feedback and reflection. And your book really did make me think about that. Something else that I read, and it was on your website, and you've been involved in the research, which is, I think, busts a myth about retrieval practice. So you've written about how retrieval practice can actually reduce anxiety when it comes to actually doing a high stakes test later on, because there's quite a few, I think, perhaps misconceptions and misunderstandings about retrieval practice, the testing effect. And I think that's probably one of the biggest ones that parents might have, students, and even some teachers, that it's stressful. And then your research was actually saying the opposite. I thought that was fascinating, and I share that all the time. I say, no, that we should be, it will boost confidence, and that's obviously why it decreases the anxiety. So do you think there's any other misconceptions or myths about that, and about retrieval practice and the testing that still exist?
I think you really highlighted, again, one of the big misconceptions. I never use the word test.
Yeah.
You will not find that word on my website. You will not find that word hardly ever, maybe not even, maybe once in Powerful Teaching in my book. I just don't use that word. And it's a word that researchers used to use, but retrieval practice, the phrase, helps almost alleviate teacher anxiety about it, also with student anxiety, because it's not, I mean, tests are a way of bringing information to mind, of pulling information out, but it's that retrieval process that is what improves learning. And so retrieval can be flashcards, tech apps, retrieval can be entry and exit tickets, retrieval could be brain dumps. One of my favorite retrieval strategies is what we call 2 things. Just simply ask students to write down 2 things they learned in class today, 2 things they learned yesterday, 2 things they learned last week, 2 things they remember about ancient Egypt. And we don't have to grade any of that. That's another misconception, is, well, all this retrieval practice sounds like a lot of grading. And it actually doesn't require any grading at all, right? You talk about this in your book, Kate. We don't have to grade everything students retrieve. They can just write down 2 things and we can move on. Or we could have a class discussion, or you could give feedback, but it doesn't have to be graded. So in that way, I see retrieval practice almost as the opposite of a test. It doesn't involve grades. It's not high stakes assessment. We need to think of the process of retrieval as a learning strategy and not an assessment strategy. So you're right. I think one of the biggest misconceptions is that retrieval may increase student anxiety. And in this paper my colleagues and I published in 2014, we showed that retrieval reduces student anxiety.
Yeah.
I think, again, one of the misconceptions is retrieval increases grading, but it actually decreases it. And another misconception is, well, retrieval is going to take a lot more prep time. You know, none of us want to spend more time prepping our lessons. I don't want to with my college students, but retrieval can reduce prep time, or it actually takes none at all. Because again, you can just throw in a quick, write down 2 things, or at the end of class, you know, I talk a bit about think, pair, share in Powerful Teaching, but you could have a quick think, pair, share that involves retrieval before you end class. So it really is such a flexible idea that, again, as teachers, we already use. We can just use retrieval more mindfully with no grading to reduce student anxiety.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, I think, about your book, my book, and the work of others. Some schools have embraced retrieval practice, but then have said do a 5-question quiz at the start of each lesson. And you've just said it's really flexible, and we can have lots of variety, and the low stakes and the no stakes. And I remembered when I shared my retrieval grid that had the points for last lesson last week further back, And you even said, well, actually, you could remove the points from it to make it truly no stakes. And I think as teachers, sometimes it's hard to let go of that, thinking, well, shouldn't I be marking it? But like you said, it comes back to that learning strategy. And on your website again, so I keep referring to the website, but I go on it all the time. You've got a guide for early years as well. So another thing about retrieval practice, I think that some teachers say, but is it for exam classes and older students? And obviously now you're a professor with older students, but as you said, you worked with Patrice Bain, with younger students. So it's really a lifelong learning strategy, isn't it?
Yes, yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned that. So the free guide that you can download at retrievalpractice.org, I've got 5 or 6 of them. I'm going to release one soon. So
excited.
Yeah, I'll give you first access, Kate. And so the early childhood guide I wrote with Lisa Fazio. She's a cognitive scientist, and Lisa is really the expert in retrieval practice in early childhood education. So it was such a great way to collaborate with her on a guide for teachers. And we talk about in that early childhood guide exactly what does retrieval practice mean at a young age. And again, it's not a new concept. If we think about how a child learns how to ride a bike, they have to practice.
Yeah.
That's retrieval practice, right? That's just practicing something in order to get better at it. So it's almost like we do retrieval practice all the time with young children. It's like retrieval practice seems to fade as we work with older children. So as you had put it very well, Kate, retrieval practice is a lifelong strategy. We talk about early education. There is so much research looking at how retrieval practice improves memory and learning for older adults as well. It's really valuable to help older adults remember what they need to know. It helps them remember to take medication. It helps older adults maintain their cognitive abilities and vocabulary. So it's this lifelong process of just practicing what we know. I actually teach psychology and neuroscience to music students in Boston. So I'm not a musician, but I teach psychology with musicians. And with musicians, they practice their instruments.
Yeah.
They can't learn how to play guitar or saxophone unless they practice. And a young child is not going to learn how to talk unless they practice, or how to walk unless they practice. And so the more we can encourage that retrieval at any age, the more powerful and effective learning can be for everyone.
Absolutely. And that's when I work with primary schools, so they're younger students in the UK, I talk about habits as well, because something that you've written about, the team will make it stick, Dunlosky, is about how students like the highlighting, the underlining, the rereading, they're not as effective, but they still continue to be quite popular with students. So we've still got a long way to go, but as you've said, if we can get students doing that from a young age, seeing the benefits, and just becoming part of a habit. And I'm actually going to carry on about your guides. When the show is going live, I will tweet out and put on Facebook all the links to these guides that can be downloaded for free, because you've got another guide about space practice as well. So for me, and you're probably the same, they go hand in hand, don't they? Retrieval and space practice. And teachers often say, well, how long should I wait? How do I space out my practice? So in terms of spacing out retrieval practice, do you have any advice for teachers with that?
I'm so glad you brought that up. It reminds me to take a step back a little bit and mention that as we discussed in Powerful Teaching, we think of retrieval practice as a foundation. So just getting students to think about and practice their knowledge. And from that foundation, we can build feedback and metacognition, like we talked about. And we can build spacing. So all spacing is spacing out retrieval. It could be spacing out studying, but let's focus on retrieval because that's more effective for learning. And so one example of spacing is if you ask students, what did you learn in school today? That's a great retrieval practice prompt. You could also ask them, what did you learn in school yesterday? And that ask about yesterday requires more mental effort, what we call in the scientific field, you've written about it, Kate, desirable difficulties. Thinking about what I even did yesterday is kind of hard for me. I have to look at my calendar. What I did last week, it would really take me some time to think about it. And so that extra component, retrieval helps learning, but then building on it with spacing makes it even more effortful and improves long-term learning even more. So the more teachers can engage students in retrieval with past content. What did you learn last semester? So often we have to reteach students the same concepts over and over because they don't remember it. If we give them opportunities to tell us, what do you remember from last semester? What do you remember from last week? Again, that doesn't have to take any prep. It doesn't have to take any grading at all. It may take some planning if teachers would like to space out content over time. So for example, I could have like a unit for my college students just about how sleep works, what REM cycles are, rapid eye movement, what EEGs are, how we measure sleep waves. I could do that all in 1 week and then move on and never talk about it again. Right? A lot of us do that. It might take a little bit of planning. What I do is I talk about sleep in kind of 1 week, but then maybe 2 weeks later on my quiz, I ask students, what's something about sleep you remember? And then we might have a little quick feedback on a Google form or in class, so they can look at their PowerPoint slides. And then maybe 6 weeks later, I ask them, what do you remember about sleep? And by that point, students are excited about retrieval practice in my class. It's low stakes. It does not feel like a test. And so they are ready to mentally engage in, oh gosh, what do I remember from sleep 6 or 8 weeks ago? And that's what spacing is you can kind of think about it as planning forward, or I think more easily just asking about stuff from the past.
Yeah, and that you're absolutely right. That was something that I was very guilty of previously, was getting through a lot of content. And I might say, okay, let's just quickly recap what we did last lesson, but not go further back, not go last week, the week before, last semester, last term. And then when it came to a high stakes or assessment, and they haven't revisited that content in so long. So yeah, this is something that I think that's a bit of a myth. We have done elements of retrieval practice, but lots of teachers, myself included, didn't have the knowledge that we now have, that you have shared and other people have shared, and it makes sense. But at the time, I wasn't doing that. I was just getting through the content. So yes, it does make you plan and teach differently. And another one of your guides, oh my goodness, these are amazing, is the transfer guide. I love that as well, because what I think you've done a great job and inspired me is really sharing what the many benefits of retrieval practice are, and transfer is one of them. So would you like to just sort of explain what you think the main benefits of retrieval and the impact of transfer is?
So our transfer guide, I co-wrote with cognitive scientist Stephen Pan, and he is absolutely one of the world's experts on transfer. He and his advisor, Tim Rickard, wrote a very extensive meta-analysis on the transfer literature. So if anyone wants to dig into the research, it's very thorough, but I'd recommend it. Our transfer guide is maybe, again, about 10 pages written by cognitive scientists for teachers. And the big key point there is that there can be, to go back to our discussion about misconceptions, there can be the misconception that, well, it sounds like all this quizzing or brain dumps or, retrieval all sounds like it helps with memorization. It sounds like it would help my students if I taught Spanish or if I taught another language to just do this rote memorization, flashcards, rote memorization. And that's a common misconception about retrieval practice. So one thing that Stephen and I really wanted to highlight is that retrieval practice also improves students' transfer of knowledge. So students transfer from one concept to a related concept, or from one scenario to another scenario. And this is something, myself as a teacher included, we want students to be able to transfer their knowledge. We don't want them to just know bits of information for that reason. So one example is from my colleague, Andrew Butler, where he looked at how retrieval practice improves transfer of learning. And one example he has in his research was students learned about the shape of airplane wings. So how airplane wings help airplanes fly, the way they're shaped, the way they're built. And then students engaged in retrieval practice, and later on, students were asked questions about bat wings. How are bat wings shaped? How do bat wings help bats fly? So that's a very simple example of transfer from an airplane to a bat. But in our guide, we give a lot more examples of, from math, for instance, how understanding one type of formula or concept helps you with all kinds of things. So there are a lot more examples in the guide, but transfer of learning in general, we talk about is kind of maybe the holy grail of education, or something we really want students to do. And retrieval practice helps. If students are just rereading their textbook, all they're going to learn is what's in the textbook. They're not practicing their knowledge. They're not going to be able to transfer that information, as opposed to if they're practicing and engaging in retrieval practice. So that transfer is so important and key. Oh, I'll mention that I also, in my dissertation research, looked at higher order learning.
Oh, yeah.
A little similar to transfer, but also if we teach students about, for instance, the basics of the welfare system in the United States, then can retrieval practice help students think more deeply about whether we should or shouldn't have welfare systems in the United States? So my own research published in 2019, I kind of looked at transfer with Bloom's taxonomy and how retrieval practice can help students with their higher order learning and their transfer too.
Yeah, I'm familiar with your work, because that's a question that I get asked by teachers about. Can I go beyond factual recall with retrieval practice? And yes, absolutely you can. And you just mentioned Andrew C. Butler, and he's wrote a fantastic post and research paper about multiple choice questions and question design. And I just think it's such an exciting time for teachers, because we're finding out all of this new information about memory, how children learn, task and question design. There are some questions that I think, well, I often get asked, and I can't give you the answer to that. Questions such as, because they're a bit complex, so I don't expect you to have these answers, but I'll just sort of share them. And they were questions that were sent to me as well, but there were questions such as, exactly how long should I wait before teaching content and then quizzing? But we don't have an exact amount of time, and it depends on, or do you have an answer for that, Pooja? Oh, you do.
Yes. Oh, I'm so excited about this.
It's amazing, because I do never have an answer for that.
Oh, well, I'm so excited, and my answer may disappoint listeners, actually.
Okay.
So my colleagues, Ludmilla Nunch and Janelle Blunt, we just published a brand new review of the literature. So we looked at 2,000 papers, We narrowed it down to 50 experiments about retrieval practice, specifically conducted in classrooms. And we looked at all of these questions that you and I get, Kate. Should it be multiple choice or short answer?
Yeah.
How long should I wait? What is the best amount of spacing? When should I give feedback, right? Those are good practical questions.
Yeah.
And the answer is they all work. Like you said, there is no optimal timing
Yeah.
based on our review of the literature, which I can see being disappointing. It's like, well, how there has to be a right way to do exactly this retrieval practice. And I think what's really fun about my review of the literature with my colleagues is that actually, if there is no optimal timing, if there is no optimal type of question, that gives us more flexibility
Yeah.
to do what we can do in our classrooms. So we're not trying to fit in retrieval practice every 20 minutes, right? We're not trying to make sure that we're doing 60% multiple choice, 40% short answer. Across these 50 experiments, we found a huge benefit of retrieval practice. The majority of effect sizes were medium or large. So very consistent benefit across young grades, secondary school, medical school, very consistent benefits of retrieval. But when you look at these optimal kinds of conditions, they all work. So again, I know that that's like, oh, it can't be, but it is, right? And retrieval is consistently beneficial for all ages. We looked at science, science content, history, different subject areas, and it just seems to work.
Oh, that is amazing.
So,
That is
yes.
incredible. Oh, well, no, that isn't a disappointing answer. That's a really reassuring answer as well, because when the EEF report came out in the UK, it focused heavily on maths and science, and then people were raising questions, what about in other subjects? But I was well aware that you had done research, especially the social studies and the history. So the fact that we've got retrieval practice research from across ages, across different subjects, and this is why you're so passionate, isn't it? Because you've been researching this for years. And,
Yeah.
and the outcome is always very, very positive, isn't it? So,
and if listeners are interested and want to get straight to this review of literature, if you go to retrievalpractice.org/review, you can get straight to the paper and get access to the research paper. And we have all 50 of those experiments in a Google spreadsheet. And so you can sort them by when they were published, the subject area, the type of students, the type of retrieval practice. So everyone can go and access this for free. So go to retrievalpractice.org/review. It's a brand new paper, and we would love to get that in the hands of teachers. Like you, Kate, you just have a spreadsheet and you can look up all of this research whenever you want, and it's all there for you.
I feel like this is a Teacher Talk Radio exclusive, like the two retrieval practice geeks getting very excited. But this is exciting, and with your background in teaching and spending the time in the classroom, I do feel that we're both coming with our passion from the same place of evidence-informed and experience. And I think that's really good what you said about the optimum timing, because I think that just then hands it over to teachers to use our professional judgment, isn't it? Because another question I get asked as well, and I think this is, again, teachers should answer this themselves, but they say, exactly how long should I spend on retrieval practice? And I can advise and say this is what I do, but I'm very reluctant to give a specific number. And Paul Kirshner, Professor Paul Kirshner, when I asked him, he said, well, it takes as long as it takes. There might be times where in the feedback, there's quite a lot of mistakes and misconceptions, so you have to go over it. Or perhaps, they've been very successful and you can move on. So would you agree with that in terms of there isn't a set amount of time to spend on retrieval practice, we just, as teachers, navigate that and figure that out in our lessons, don't we?
Yes, definitely. I mean, putting together this review, looking at all of the literature, it took us years to make this happen, to put this research together. It really seems that so many different types of timing, so many different types of questions, so many different types of students, all of those studies show consistent benefits. So what that means for me in my classroom with my university students, for example, or for you, Kate, what I like to say is you do you.
Yeah.
Right? If you can fit in retrieval practice for 5 minutes a day and that's it, awesome. I almost think of it like exercise, the idea of like, I know that, maybe 60 minutes of running is ideal, but that's not going to happen today.
Yeah.
I did 20 minutes of yoga this morning, and I'm pretty proud of myself. I don't think 20 minutes is maybe what's recommended, but that's what I could fit in. And that's what works for me. And so definitely, I hope that this review is helpful for you, Kate, we don't have the answer about optimal timing. But at this point, honestly, I'm not convinced that there is optimal timing. Our classrooms are so different. Your classroom, Kate, so different from my classroom. So how are we really supposed to say that you and I, Kate, should use retrieval the same way? That's where what you said, our professional judgment comes into play, given the amount of time we teach, or the subjects we teach, or when we can fit it in, right? So any is better than none. Any retrieval practice, we know from research, is better than none.
Absolutely. And I think I have heard you use about a sporting analogy, and I said that about a salad. A one-off salad is good, but you have to eat healthy regularly. A one-off salad won't make you slim, but if it's a regular part of your routine and something that you are doing consistently, then you will see the benefits, like with the retrieval practice. And like you said, you have that light bulb moment, and there's a light bulb on front of powerful teaching, isn't it? It's the brain as a light, the light coming out. And when students have that, when they realize, oh, I can remember this easier than I could previously, and when they realize it works, that is incredibly powerful. I can see why you called your book Powerful Teaching, because that is exactly it. And there was something else that I just wanted to mention to you as well, because you wrote a really good blog that I found very inspiring, because somebody tweeted, are there any female cognitive scientists? And you went with that and you said, yes, there is. And I just think, actually, for women in education, cognitive science is definitely a field where yourself, the learning scientists, Elizabeth Bjork, Patrice Bain, myself writing about it, I thought that was really, really special that you highlighted that as well. So thank you so much. We have a movement in the UK called Women Ed. So I think you've really shown that women are leading the way in cognitive psychology and science, which perhaps might not have been the case in the past, decades ago, but certainly now. So that's incredible. And you've worked with all these amazing people. What do you plan? What are your future plans? What any more books? Because I think you've definitely got another book in you, Pooja Agarwal. I would buy it and read it. So what's next for you?
Well, I want to say thank you for acknowledging that list that I've put together of women in cognitive science. I've called it because of that tweet, as you said, really, really spurred me to action. And so it's called "This is What a Cognitive Scientist Looks Like." And so if you go to retrievalpractice.org/scientist, or it might be scientists with the S, I don't remember, ironically.
I'll share it.
Yeah, if you go to my website, you can find this list, and one of my next projects is to update the list. And one of the things that really excites me about having that resource available is because I want educators to read their research. And I want educators to cite their research. The list includes lists of women of color who are doing phenomenal work in this area. And as you said, the past has traditionally highlighted other people not on the list, to put it thinly veiled. And we need to, especially in, as you said, women educators, to highlight women scientists. So for anyone listening, please look at that list. I highly recommend looking at the work by Ayanna Thomas on retrieval practice, Lisa Fazio, they're both on Twitter. Lisa Sun and I wrote a guide on metacognition. There are so many women scientists. Please start looking at their research and citing them. There are other people in the past who have done valuable foundational work. We need to move forward and highlight people from marginalized communities who are doing really fantastic science now. So please do check that out. Thank you, Kate, for mentioning that.
Yeah, well, no, thank you for shining a spotlight on those individuals. I found that really inspiring. So yes, I will share that and I will encourage everyone to read that. So it's really important.
Yep. And then since you asked about a next book, I will say that there, of course, are a lot of books out there, including yours, Kate. I've got a list of recommended books on the science of learning, all on my website as well, so you can share that too, Kate. In terms of my next projects, I just wrapped up this review of the literature I mentioned. So I'm very glad that that is now out there and freely available. I am working on collaborations with scientists in Brazil about study strategies that students use in Brazil and retrieval practice research in Brazil. It's wonderful to know that retrieval practice seems to benefit all students in a variety of settings. There is hardly any research done outside of the United States and Western Europe. So in our review of the literature, we found only 3 studies outside of the US and Western Europe were from Taiwan, Turkey, and Pakistan. And so across those 3 studies conducted in areas outside of essentially white, rich, democratic countries, we still found benefits of retrieval practice, but we need more research in other parts of the world. So for instance, Kate, I would love to see research done in Abu Dhabi with teachers on retrieval practice and forming those collaborations. I know it can be easier said than done. Reach out to some of those women in cognitive science. If you're listening from around the world, reach out to those scientists and see if they're interested in doing some research in your country. So exploring more of those international collaborations is really what I'm thinking about now. And of course, thinking about how to continue improving my classes with my college students. I know for all of us that takes a lot more work than maybe people realize. So I'm focusing on my teaching right now as well.
Oh, I imagine you're a brilliant teacher because you're helping us all become better teachers. And I know you've done lots of keynote presentations, and actually on my website, loveteach87.com, I've got links to you from YouTube where you've delivered presentations, and I loved you on Jennifer Gonzalez podcast, The Call to Pedagogy. So you've done absolutely loads of stuff. Because I know Ross McGill, Teacher Toolkit, he's really keen to invite you and Patrice Bain over to the UK. And I think he said that he had that planned, and then obviously the disruption with COVID. I'm going back to the UK later this year, but I think it'd be amazing if you could go to the UK. I think it would just be fantastic. We have Research Ed events for you to speak at one of those events, or I come to America to see you because I just I want to meet you personally. I've got a list of people, but you're all spread out across America. You, the Bjorks, and Patrice Bain, lots of people that I would absolutely love to meet, but thankfully I've been able to meet you virtually. So yes, I'm really excited about reading that new review that you've done, and just keep following you on social media, retrievalpractice.org. Thank you so much for that website. I mean, that's helped me tremendously. There's also the guides in other languages as well. which is incredible. And when I get asked questions about maths, I say, oh, actually, there's a guide on retrievalpractice.org because I do not teach maths. So I really will be encouraging everyone, if they haven't already, to explore your website. But I mean, you should be incredibly proud of that, as well as your book with Patrice, which has just done so well and inspired lots of other people, including myself and Ross Morrison McGill, and Doug Lamov is writing about retrieval practice and Teach Like a Champion version 3. So all of this is incredibly exciting, isn't it? So
Yeah.
I am very, very grateful for your time today. My mind's blown by everything you've said. I'm even more enthusiastic about retrieval practice, which I didn't even think was possible. So yeah, best of luck with everything that you are doing in the future, and thank you for joining us at Teachers Talk Radio.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kate, and thanks for sharing all of this retrieval practice work with teachers around the world. It makes such a big difference.
It is. We've got a long way to go. Like you said, the fact that you're working with Brazil and you know, and your guides are in different languages. Yeah, there's lots of enthusiasm and interest. But yes, there's still a lot more work to be done in terms of spreading the message, but we'll keep going with that. Thank you, Pooja.
Every teacher loves stationery, right? Imagine getting a selection of fun, beautiful and unique stationery items designed and selected especially for teachers, delivered through your door every month. You need to check out teacherslovestationery.club.
I'm always so excited when the box arrives. It's such a treat.
My Teachers Love Stationery box is just a little treat to myself every month.
It's always full of delightful and surprising items, including some really good quality stationery brands like Faber-Castell and Stabilo.
And because you never know what you're going to get, it makes it even more fun and special when you get it.
It feels really great to be supporting a family business that's run by real teachers. I can't help feeling like they just know what I'm going to enjoy using stationery-wise better than I do myself.
Visit teacherslovestationery.club and enter the code TTRadio when you buy your first stationery box to save £2 today. teacherslovestationery.club.
Well, that interview with Pooja Agarwal was absolutely fantastic. As you can tell, if you listen to that, her enthusiasm and her knowledge is just so admirable. And we've had lots of comments in the Podbean chat. So we have Susan listening from Geneva, and Susan teaches Arabic, English, and French language. And then in the chat, we spoke about the importance of retrieval practice for learning any language. Even if you take a language learning app like Duolingo, then it's regularly quizzing and testing you. So yes, really, really important. Lots of feedback coming in from social media and in the chat box, saying that they've enjoyed the conversation. They really enjoyed listening to Pooja Agarwal. That was fascinating about the optimal timing. This is a question that I have been asked many times. How long should I wait between teaching new content and then asking a retrieval practice question? And as I said, I can give advice based on what I do in the classroom, and to make sure that I do ask regular retrieval practice questions that are spaced out. I've created specific tasks and activities. For example, my retrieval practice grid. So if you just Google retrieval practice grid Kate Jones, you'll find free templates, and it has questions that will cover content from last lesson, last week, 2 weeks ago, or further back. And then you can edit that and change that so that you are covering content from last lesson, but you're going beyond that. And the level of challenge will increase. But I think that is really, really important, what Pooja has said about not fixating on that exact amount of time. Because teachers naturally, I think these are great questions to ask. How long should we spend on retrieval practice? What types of retrieval practice should we use? How should we space it out? These are great questions, and it shows that we are really getting to grips with retrieval practice, implementing it, applying it in our classroom, but that's the main thing, is that we are using retrieval practice. And I suppose with all research, we have to accept that it will never provide us with all of the answers or the silver bullet that we sometimes search for, but instead it can guide us and help us. And then, as Patrice and Pooja have written about, it's about combining the research with teacher experience and professional judgment. So I really, really loved that. As we've said many times throughout the show, do check out retrievalpractice.org. Fantastic range of resources available. There's also my website, lovetoteach87.com. If you haven't read Powerful Teaching, Unleash the Science of Learning, I highly recommend it, as do many others. And of course, I just might as well plug my books. It seems appropriate. I have authored 4 books. Love to Teach had a chapter on retrieval practice, but it covers way more than cognitive science. It has literacy, ed tech, being a form tutor, and so on. But then there were 3 books specifically focused on retrieval practice. So the first book was the Pink Book. That is an introduction to retrieval practice. What does the research tell us? And lots of classroom resources. And then the second book that I didn't plan on writing, but I was reflecting on retrieval practice. I missed some things out the first book that I wish I'd included. There was more research published or that I found. So I ended up writing Retrieval Practice 2, implementing, embedding, and reflecting. And then my final retrieval practice book, the Blue Book, is just a resource guide. It doesn't have any academic research or literature. It just has an idea for the classroom, what the idea is, a visual, how it works, and top tips. And I created the resource guide because teachers asked me to. Teachers said, I really like all the ideas across your books, but I wish there was one book with all the ideas in one place. And I also came up with some new ideas as well. So please do check them out. Someone asked me recently, which one do I think is the best book? And that's really difficult because Love to Teach is different. But out of my 3 retrieval practice books, I actually do have a favourite, and that is Retrieval Practice 2, the purple book. I do think the pink book is necessary to gain understanding, and Retrieval Practice 2, I wrote it assuming that people at least know what retrieval practice is, the act of recalling information from long-term memory. But I absolutely love Retrieval Practice 2 because of the latest research. People like Pooja Agarwal are in Retrieval Practice 2. I reached out to academics. So in that book, there are contributions from Dr. Pooja Agarwal, Dylan William, John Hattie, the Bjorks, Jared Cooney-Horvath, so many amazing academics, but also amazing teachers as well. We've got a fantastic case study from Adam Boxer about retrieval roulette and carousel learn. So it's just really, really good. Hugh Richards writes about retrieval practice as a middle leader. Lots of wonderful case studies. And then the final chapter is about retrieval practice across a range of subjects. For example, Mark Enser writes about retrieval practice in geography, Jennifer Webb about retrieval practice in English. And we have drama, PE, design technology, psychology, business studies, primary. The primary example from John Hutchinson is incredible. So anyway, I could go on and on about retrieval practice all day. As I said, I've written 3 books. But next week, I am very excited to announce that I will be joined by David Didow. David is fantastic. I've met him once in Dubai at Research Ed Dubai, where he was the keynote speaker, and his keynote presentation was superb. I'm also a big fan of his books. He's authored so many books, I'll have to count before next week. But I'm currently listening to his book, Making Kids Cleverer. And this is on Audible. And as I've said in previous shows, I love Audible. listening to audiobooks, and I really like this book. I haven't finished because it's 10 hours long, so I've still got a few more hours to go. But David narrates the book himself, which just makes it even better to hear him talking and reading his book. And it is a fascinating book. So I aim to finish that book and then ask David lots of questions next week about how we can make kids cleverer. From what I've heard so far from the book, it really is very interesting, thought-provoking. It makes me want to become more cleverer. So I think that's always a good thing. And it's obviously putting forward the argument for knowledge-rich curriculum. But there's lots of questions that we can ask David. So please do contact me on social media. I'm at KateJones_teach on Twitter and Instagram. I have a Facebook page and I'm on LinkedIn. And you can listen to all of the Teacher Talk radio shows back as a podcast. We have another show today happening actually very soon. Let me just check. I think our timings have changed because of the summer holiday. Yes, it will be at 11 a.m. and that is with Dorian Brown. And he'll again be talking about technology in education. So that is set to be a really interesting show. So once again, thank you very much for taking the time to join me. I hope you found that interesting. If you have any questions for Professor Dr. Pooja K. Agarwal, as I said, you can reach out to her on Twitter. And she's very good. And if she hasn't written about it already, I'm sure she can point you in the right direction. There's plenty to keep you busy if that's what you want to do, perhaps over your summer holidays or when you go back to school. But lots of schools that do contact me and say, we'd like to learn more about retrieval practice. Have you got some light reading? Then I say, yeah, go to retrievalpractice.org, check out the guides. They can easily be downloaded, shared with all the colleagues in your school. Also, I have created a free online course with Seneca. So if you go to Seneca Learn, there is a teacher CPD section, and it's completely free. All you need to do is sign up with an email. There's lots of other courses. There's a cognitive science course by Jonathan Firth. There's a leadership course designed by Sam Strickland. There's a well-being course designed by Kat Howard. Assessment by Dawn Cox. Lots and lots of fantastic online courses that you can complete freely. And on completion, you get a lovely certificate, which is always nice, isn't it? So as I said, lots and lots of materials out there. We'll just keep spreading and sharing the word about effective teaching and learning strategies. Something actually that David Dido has written about as well. He co-authored a book with Nick Rose, What Every Teacher Needs to Know About Psychology. That's also brilliant. I published that quite a few years ago, but if you're looking to familiarize yourself with educational research, specifically memory, psychology, how we learn, then that is another book that I would highly recommend. So thank you once more for listening. Enjoy the rest of your holidays, whatever it is that you're doing. I hope it's relaxing and enjoyable. And I will be back at the same time, 9 a.m. next week.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.